Here we are.
Hello, hello. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday, baby.
Yeah, it's a good one. Sun is shining
I know.
after a few days of it being not sunny and kind of cold.
That's right. Yeah, thank God.
Yeah.
So, I love it.
Yeah, me too.
Totally.
Nice.
And I'm feeling much better, so that's something to be grateful for.
Yeah, you even sound better. Your energy's back to
Right.
almost normal.
I know. It's not quite there yet.
No, but you're very close, so
Yeah.
that's always nice.
Definitely.
You definitely are past the curve.
I'm over the hump.
Yeah, over the hump. That's what I'm thinking of.
Just in time for last Thursday.
That's true. Here we are, last Thursday. Thanks everyone for joining us so far.
Indeed. Much appreciated.
Yep.
We've got a bit of a different setup today. Which
Yeah.
we'll get into here in a few minutes. But people could probably gather that by the thumbnail.
Yeah, and I kind of put it into the post, at least on Instagram,
Totally.
that it's going to be a little different this week because, what we're finding is that, we're wanting to keep this interesting
Right.
for you guys as the listeners and for us as the hosts. So we were just having a very honest conversation with each other about, how we've been feeling with stuff. And it's like, how many times can we just randomly pick topics, which is fun. We've been having a good time with it, but I feel like we're wanting to just keep this one fresh and, change it up because we can.
Right.
Because it's so casual and we're creating this stream so we can make it what we want.
And you've been wanting to talk about this one for a long time.
I have. And
for literally years.
For years. And so, after we had our talk this morning, we totally figured that, this is going to be a kickoff, basically. Oh, Mario's very quiet.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you, George. So this episode is going to be a kickoff for basically the rest of the summer for me and information that I want to share. But yeah, because we're going to talk about Manson, 1960s, Laurel Canyon, the culture creation that happened during that time. This is a really popular subject. A lot of people like to talk about it. A lot of people like hearing about it. A lot of people know quite a bit about it. Mm-hmm. And I'm in that boat. I always have been since a young girl. I was always fascinated with this era, the music of it, the dress of it. I was more naive back then to not know. I didn't know the culture creation behind it. But, it's been an area of fascination for me. And I really like talking about it. So it's going to be the summer of love.
That's right.
In the healing home. And so, we're going to roll out more episodes about this topic. And then ultimately, I am going to do a presentation that probably won't be like a live stream. It'll just be an actual presentation that lives on my channel.
Right.
That's totally solely devoted to this topic in its entirety and all the points that I'd love to bring up and talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Guys, she is really passionate about this topic. And actually, maybe we could wait even just before we're about to get into it or whatever. But you reminded me of the fact that you feel like you tried to get a lot of this off your chest with a presentation that we did years ago together in person, and for various reasons, you were kind of flustered while giving it.
Yeah, and it was like probably over a decade ago. And
I know, which is kind of crazy to think about. It
definitely was over a decade, actually. To now think about it, it was probably like 2013, I think. So it was probably about a decade.
Yeah.
But yeah, I never felt like I got to fully express myself with it for lots of reasons. I was much younger. I wasn't used to doing presentations, all sorts of stuff. And I've learned a lot since that time.
And some pivotal books have come out since then.
Yep, pivotal books that have actually changed my entire view on the whole subject matter entirely, and how I looked at it and what I initially thought it was, what the mainstream propaganda wants you to think it is, what even some of the alternative books that have come out on it, kind of like they've based a lot of their research on a lot of the mainstream stuff, which come to find out really just paints a very black and white picture of the situation and does not go into grand detail of how involved things like the CIA and the FBI and the mafia are in this whole entire situation when it comes down to just the 60s in general as a decade, but I think more specifically Laurel Canyon and Manson.
Right. And even just today, thinking about us having this conversation, there's a few symbolic threads that I want to pull at now that I was never really that interested in talking about beforehand, but now I'm kind of seeing things in a new light. And so I think it's one of these things where it is so it's so baked into pop culture, and there's so many roads that lead to this line of information. I mean, the amount of famous people, the amount of celebrities, musicians, people of influence, how they were kind of caught up in this whole entire narrative is really fascinating. But even just like the thing I'm thinking of right now is the fact that Charles Manson at one point had a swastika tattooed or carved into his forehead or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just like, of all the symbols, the swastika,
right?
You know, and obviously people weren't used to seeing. To me, it's kind of hilarious now. People weren't used to seeing people with facial tattoos. Now it's like pretty common, actually.
Yeah, it's very
but
common.
It was very shocking. But of all the symbols, I think that's very interesting, and so I feel like little things like that are kind of worth unpacking. I always think of the films of the era as well. I think of Stanley Kubrick, and I think of 2001: A Space Odyssey and the space race, and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's going to be a really, really interesting series to dive into here for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're pumped too, because I know that, I mean, we've had so many conversations about this stuff over the years, but looking at it more from like a symbolic standpoint, there's so much to unpack. Because there's just so much going on so many levels with it.
The Beatles and Helter Skelter stuff.
Yeah.
And there's like a million different things. Just thinking about it earlier, I was like, wow. Yeah, there's multiple episodes here, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And so for me, it's going to be basically, really picking out some of the more solid key points, some of the things that really over the years like that have blown my mind, and then the connections to so many other events, not only that happened in the 60s but past the 60s, murders and serial killers and all this stuff. It's this cults, this whole weave of things were really started in this time. So it's quite interesting.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
That's another one.
Out,
yep.
Which is just, I don't even know if it's like a propaganda film, because it's seemingly just there's like no truth in it at all, hardly.
Yeah, really not much at all. I mean, the only things that are really kind of stand out to me that are really true is that it takes place in Hollywood, and that the Manson family was living at the Spahn Ranch, which was a old
very
movie
basic
set.
sort of generic.
All the basic
things,
generic things are there. They're living in the canyon. They're living in Benedict Canyon. They're also living in Laurel Canyon, and it's like off of Sunset Strip. There's that stuff, and then there's Hollywood movie shit, whatever. But yeah, in terms of if you didn't know anything about the Manson saga and you went to see that movie and thought that it was telling you the accurate truth, you're sorely mistaken.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
definitely. Well, we'll get into it.
Yeah.
Hey, you made some lovely drinks for us.
Yeah, so we've got a nice one here. So it's strawberry season. It's still strawberry season. Last week, it's going to be strawberry season for the next couple weeks.
Oh, yeah.
But this here is, it's kind of like I used vinegar cordials. So I have a strawberry and Thai basil cordial mixed with a turmeric and ginger cordial in this.
Nice.
With sparkling water and fresh strawberries.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man, yeah.
Real nice. Our friend Ashley gave us these cordials like years ago, probably like 2 years ago or so, maybe 3 now, probably even more than that. But I've just kept them in the refrigerator. And I mean, it's basically just vinegar with the fruits and the sweetener, and it's really good. So
it is good.
Tastes nice.
If only you guys could have some with us.
Maybe someday you guys can come on over.
And speaking of which, let's see who is here, who is hanging out. Flat Earth Hippie, what's good, man? Thanks for being here. As always, nice to see you.
Howdy, Hank.
Kabir is here.
What's up, Kabir?
Liam is here. Third Eye Edify podcast. George is here. What's going on, man?
Howdy, George. Had such a good time talking with Petra.
Yeah, totally. Sounds like you guys had a really good chat. Jess Ness is here. What's up, family fun guy, James and family? Hope you guys are doing well. Such sweet people. Oh my gosh. We will be talking about them a bit later, though.
Yes, we will.
Yes. Moonlander Dave, what's up, dude?
Howdy, Dave.
And Dave, I got your package in the mail. Thank you. Really, really cool. I just took a very quick sort of cursory glance at the deck, and I'm a fan. It's very, very interesting. Brandon Bonanza, what's up, dude? I was just on Oversharing with Brandon.
Hey, Brandon.
That premiered earlier today, not too long ago. PK is here. What's up, dude? And then
Howdy, PK.
Oversharing, what's up?
Hey, Sharon.
And then we've got... Let's see
I see
here.
Dave has a question, but
Oh,
we'll
yeah,
go through the
already,
rest.
George, I like this. Polanski, Kubrick, NASA. Man, yeah, exactly. dude.
Yeah.
There's so much to
Oh, my
talk
God.
about.
There's so much to talk about. It's fun.
Indeed, Robert Anton Wilson.
Yep.
Okay. So what's up, Pedro?
Howdy, Pedro.
Nice to always see you, dude. Probably going to hang out with this guy next week.
Yeah.
And then Robert Page. Greetings.
What's up, Robert?
And then Triangle is here. What's up, Debbie?
Hey, Debbie. I saw
And-
Michelle Mullen was up there, too.
Oh, nice. I must have skipped her. Stacy Sunshine.
Howdy, Stacy.
Caribbean Roots. Nice
What's
to
up,
see
Root?
you.
Rudy Root.
Mercury Mel. Hello, hello.
Howdy, Mel.
And then Sarah G is here. Nice to see you.
And Liam.
Yes, indeed. Liam is here.
Howdy, Liam.
Thank you guys for hanging out.
Oh, he said he picked strawberries today in his greenhouse. So that's awesome.
Ooh, right on. Very cool. Love me some strawberries.
And I saw that Dave asked, is Timothy Leary something about an agent, maybe?
CIA asset, yes or no?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. I think he was definitely a CIA asset for sure, because he was like leading the pack of so many of these, like the trip festivals, the acid tests, hanging around too with more of like the Allen Ginsbergs of the world, and which that whole history, the Allen Ginsbergs and the Beatniks have also have a very interesting history that goes pretty deep, and a lot of their roots obviously are on the East Coast, New York style, Greenwich Village, but Colorado was a really big hub for a lot of the beatnik poets and stuff like that. And I know Allen Ginsberg actually had I think it was a school or something. I don't remember what it was called, but there's a book out there called When I Was Cool. And it's a guy's account of how he went to this school or this poetry workshop thing when he was young, like a teenager. And how like Allen Ginsberg like used to come on to him and stuff. And there's all these weird like sexual things going on. And the book, we don't have it anymore. I think that we gave it away. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's called When I Was Cool. Just research that.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
And it's connected to Allen Ginsberg. And yeah, there's all sorts of sketchy shit in that scene. And it was a really good read. And it intrigued me more about all these people and how a lot of it's connected. And Allen Ginsberg was hanging around with Timothy Leary and hanging around at the acid tests and Golden Gate Park and all that stuff. So
Right.
yes, indeed, I think that he was an asset. I think that all those people I mentioned were probably connected somehow, in cahoots.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Somehow,
no, absolutely.
for sure. Yeah.
For sure. It was that era. It really feels to me like it was it was post World War II. And I've made a big thing out of 1947. And 1947 was a huge, huge year. A lot of things were restructured within the government. A lot of new branches of the government were created. It was the initiation for like this whole new sea change, this whole new program, and I think that in a lot of ways, the culture creators, they think in terms of campaigns, they think in terms of programs, I think, that last for years, decades, And so to me, it's very clear that there was a campaign obviously during World War II, clearly. And then right after World War II, it was this new initiation. It was this like brand new sort of thing that was rolled out in so many different ways, which I can get into that at some point. And maybe it makes sense to get into it actually, because it almost lays the groundwork, I think, for the 60s.
Yeah, we could do that
as well. So 1947 was this big change here in the West with the government. And then I think the 60s was the initiation of this new campaign sort of thing. And it was like very clearly timed, it seems like to me, to have come to an end by the end of the 60s, by the beginning of the next decade, by the 70s.
Right.
And so that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about here. So it seems like there was a lot of like groundwork that was laid out obviously throughout the 50s, but then the early 60s, and then it kind of all just came to a head, in the late 60s, it seems to me. And then obviously there's been subsequent campaigns since then. 2001 was a huge one as well. What we've been going through over the last few years, another huge campaign, So,
yeah.
So to me, that's what's important about kind of diving back into some of this material, is to see like how this shit has been going on for a very, very long time. I'm sure obviously most people here are well aware of that. So it's not new to this audience at all, but it is interesting once you've gone through even more campaigns in your life, more, propaganda. Revisiting the old propaganda is very interesting, and you could see how things have just been built on top of each other, essentially.
No, definitely. And you bringing this up too, because, the way I look at this place now, and I think society in general, I honestly think we are we're always constantly in a massive experiment, like a huge, massive social experiment. And all of these campaigns or decades or whatever you want to say, they're all part of the mass experiment, but there's individual experiments inside of these.
Oh yeah, totally.
And so one of the things, because I was going through my computer looking for notes and photos and things that I have saved on this topic, and I created a document in 2020 that said, what was it? It was like the 1960s and 2020. So for some reason during 2020, I thought that there were crossovers going on between the two. And so one of the things was the Age of Aquarius. Who can kind of deny that? That was a huge thing in the 60s. And then that's kind of when all these people started saying, okay, now the Age of Aquarius is starting and whatever. And I don't know, what age we're really in truly. So I don't totally subscribe to it. But
you bring up a really good point, because that could be a whole topic in and of itself, is
right.
the Age of Aquarius programming.
Totally. Yeah. So anyway, I was seeing crossover with 2020 and the 1960s during 2020. And it was just a short series of notes that I wrote for myself, and I just saved in the computer. But I thought it was interesting. There was also the breaking up of the family, because obviously during the vid, people were quarantining and not being allowed to see their family, or they were choosing to not see their family, whatever the thing was. So there was this divide happening. Also in the 60s, there was an ushering in of technology that was kind of being tested and run under the radar. And there's a documentary out, and it basically talks about the people that referred to themselves as tech hippies.
Oh, yeah.
So
right.
These really highly intellectual, highly educated university types, they were recruited by the military and the CIA to run these tech experiments, do programming, all sorts of very advanced things for the time.
It was basically the foundation of what we now know as the internet.
Exactly, because it was like they were making servers and doing all these things. And I wish I could remember the name of that doc. Maybe we can find it.
Right. No, that's a really good point, because if I'm not mistaken, it's the same thing people always believe. It's really fascinating how it doesn't change. Did they not think that they were going to usher in utopia by bringing in all this technology?
Totally.
I mean, come on.
And it's the same program.
It's the same program, yeah.
And the same thing is happening now, and the same thing was happening even before 2020, but with 2020, it was like, okay, now we're literally going to take kids out of school. We're going to put them in digital school. You're not going to go to work anymore. You're all going to work from home, even if you've never worked from home before. You're not going to Thanksgiving. You're going to do it on Zoom.
You can't hug grandma because you're going to kill her.
Exactly. All of these things. So the separation, the breaking down of the family was very strong during that time, as it was with the 60s.
That's true. There are, I'm sure there are many parallels actually once you start looking into it.
Yeah, once you really start looking into it. But that's one of the things I wanted to mention because it was just a little like cherry on top, I guess, when I was going through my notes of going like, oh shit, okay. Yeah, so I was totally thinking about this, and it makes sense. And there's probably more crossover between other decades, and this too. You can't just say it's just going to be 2020 or whatever. But
well, that's how all of this propaganda works. It builds on top of each other. That's how literally programming, like actual computer programs and computer languages, that's how it works. And so you literally are building languages upon each other, and you can't have the latest language without the previous one. And so then all of the languages, though, what they really break down to at the end of the day are just ones and zeros, which is the most basic binary programming language that there is. And so our propaganda works very much the same way.
Yeah.
Where you can't have this campaign or this thing without the previous one and without the previous one and whatever. And then now we live in a world where it's so advanced and it's so crazy to us that when we see it, we're like, how the hell did we get here? It's like, well, look at history. Look at all of the previous campaigns that have been laid out,
Right.
Yeah. So it's all completely related.
It is completely related, and it's really interesting, when you kind of start to put it all together.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. So, good stuff. I'm glad you're finally going to be able to kind of get some of this stuff off your chest.
Yeah, me too. And, people who know me well or, have hung out with me even in person have probably heard me talk about this, over the years or whatever, because it's always been a fascination of mine. And I always find it so fascinating because there's so much mystery involved with it. But then at the same time, it's very clear and obvious what's going on. It's really interesting. There's so many layers to it. And that's one of the reasons why I find it so intriguing too.
Right. Well, I would encourage you to just to let people know too. I would say that this is us starting to dip our toes back into these waters.
Yeah.
And that you specifically, are going to be talking about a lot of important aspects of what happened during this decade, the important factors and the key players and things like that. But this is all a means for you, kind of in a way, to refamiliarize yourself with maybe the most important aspects of the whole entire storyline. Right?
Yeah.
So that you can create this presentation or whatever.
Right.
And so I think this is kind of like an initiatory sort of preliminary kind of thing here.
Yeah, totally. And thanks for that, because by no means are we going through everything tonight.
You can't. It's too much.
It's not going to be this in-depth, like, laying all the research out. It's basic. It's literally just kind of the getting the ball rolling, as you said.
Right.
And so what I did is I just, I sat down and went through a couple books of mine, but also just went through my own thoughts and to think about like some of the main topics with this that are really good to think about and understand, or just to start your mind thinking, or
wrap your head around,
I guess.
Yeah.
And as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of more. But
exactly.
And that's how this goes. And that's why I told myself I'm just going to do, what I can tonight for our,
Because, and I've said this before, people might know this already, but you've read like most of, if not all of the books about this topic out there, specifically about Charles Manson.
Yeah, specifically about Manson. I will admittedly say I have not read Helter Skelter, the main book by Vincent Bugliosi, because...
But it's the most normie book,
too. It's the most normie propaganda, false, like, picture-painted story of them all.
Right.
And as I started reading the Manson books, and as I was getting into researchers who were understanding that Bugliosi was literally just a man who, he was basically not a lawyer. Was he? Yeah, he was the lawyer, or that's the other thing. I can't remember even his position, but he's a court system man. So he was all. It was all about his image. It's about money. It's saving face and all that stuff. And the book that goes into that very much is Chaos by Tom O'Neill, which if anyone listening is into this information, and if you haven't read Chaos by Tom O'Neill, I highly recommend that book. And that book came out maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And Tom O'Neill was working for a magazine at the time, and he was given the assignment to write an article about the Manson murders because it was like an anniversary of the murders. And he was having a conflict with it because he was like, well, what am I going to say about this that hasn't already been said? And he started doing research, and then he started realizing like, whoa, this is way deeper and way bigger than I actually thought. And he was able to he was able to get Vincent Bugliosi like as an interview. And just through interviewing him, he quickly realized that Bugliosi was lying about everything, and that it was all about his story, and that's it. And it was basically, he's in cahoots with the court system. He was in cahoots with the police and the LAPD. He's in cahoots with the FBI, and he was covering up a lot of the real stuff that Tim O'Neill was finding out. So Tim O'Neill came to him with all of this research that he found that was like, hey, your story doesn't match up with what I'm finding. And Bugliosi obviously didn't like that. And so he basically like kicked him out of his house, and he wouldn't talk and this and that. And long story short, it kind of confirmed my reasonings for never really giving a shit about Helter Skelter, the book.
Right.
Because it's totally the mainstream propaganda story that they want you to think. The satanic panic, the this, the that, the cult leader, all of that, which in the long term, when you do this research deep down, you find out that it's actually really not even like that.
No.
He
right.
wasn't running a cult. It wasn't a satanic thing. Was he maybe involved with people that were doing things like that? Yeah, probably. But it's not like what the mainstream media wants you to think.
Well, even too, the way they try and paint it as well is that if you ask most normal people what they think about Charles Manson and what he actually did, they would say that he murdered people.
Yes.
He never actually murdered anybody.
Yeah, not that's like on record. He's stabbed people, he's cut people's ears off, he's, whatever, but he never supposedly was at these murders that happened.
But people think that he's like the hands-on murderer, probably.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
But that's actually seemingly not the case. And I just have to say, before we like get too deep into any of this stuff, I know one of the things you've wrestled with for years too, and that this means that you're not opposed to it, is like how much of this whole entire thing was fabricated.
Exactly.
How many did any of these people actually really die?
Exactly.
Or is this all some sort of a construct, sort of fairy tale woven for the masses?
Right. I'm definitely open to that being the case, because I really think that what this was, what the murders were, whether they really happened or not, it was literally an end cap to the 1960s hippie dippy movement.
Right.
It was the moment. And if you even talk to people like our friend Bud, who we talk about all the time, obviously, who was in the scene when this happened, talking about how literally the moment that these murders took place, like people locked their doors from then on out. And that was not the case before. It was like people weren't in that mindset. It was much more just
right. Yeah,
relaxed.
I've heard that multiple times.
Yeah, and so it was like the
people were put on edge.
Yep, fear, like literally over the entire world and the entire nation. With a blink of an eye, people were terrified for their lives. And I guess rightfully so, if you're a normie and you hear this and like that's the deal and there's a slaying and it's Hollywood movie stars and all this stuff, of course that's gonna affect some people for sure.
And one of the things I always think about too is the fact that, and Dave McGowan, who we'll be talking about, really got into this in his Program to Kill book, but the whole idea too is that the system always wants to demonize the individual. That they always want to make this association that if you are an individual, that means you're going against the grain. That means that you're going against society. This means that you have extreme thoughts and that you're ready to take it out on society, and that you're ready to be this lone wolf, murderer, serial killer, gunman sort of thing. And we still see the same propaganda where it's literally these individuals that they basically put out there, these patsy people, you know, and that's part of the subliminal programming of all this stuff, is that the individual is dangerous. The sovereign person is dangerous. The person that can think for themselves is dangerous. That's one of the like main sort of programming things I think that's attached with all this stuff. Just got kind of inherently is that the individual is someone that you need to be wary of. And that if somebody has their own opinions and somebody can think for themselves, then that person is dangerous.
Right.
That person goes against our collective sort of efforts or whatever. So to me, that's always the thing too. And that is one of the things too that Dave McGowan talked about, this whole idea that starting really in the 60s, definitely in the 70s as well, and it seems like it kind of tapered off after a little while, although there are instances of this, but that a lot of cults that had a leader were actually intelligence operations, basically. And that there were a number of cults that were basically by the CIA, and these cults could then, you know, perform all sorts of different experiments on people and whatnot. And nobody knew that the CIA was behind it because they were always hiding behind this cult leader. But it was always a cult leader that they would kind of prop up, you know, so they can kind of keep their experiments insulated that way. And so anyway, so I always think that that's part of the deal. This big, bad boogeyman sort of thing that could be your neighbor. It
Right.
could be the weirdo living across the street, you
Right.
know, who, whatever, is always by themselves and whatever sort of thing. And so they're always trying to roll out that sort of agenda, the anti-individuation agenda, the anti-individual agenda, that if you're not part of the collective, you're not part of the community, then you're kind of an enemy against the community.
Yeah, it's true. And then, you know, to take that a step further, you know, a lot of these lone gunmen or, you know, whatever, it's like Charles Manson from like an early age was kind of groomed to be this way, or he was selected somehow, or it was,
Yeah, right.
you know what I mean? It's like his history. He was in and out of, you know, like foster care. He was in correctional institutions for children. He is supposedly that he was kind of like given up by his mom. And then through the prison system, basically got hooked up with people in prison that he ended up hooking up with outside of prison during the 60s, during the hippie movement. One guy in particular, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it was a Kaufman, something Kaufman, and him and Charlie reconnected when they were on the outside, and this guy basically then became like the Rolling Stones manager. Why does some random inmate that was in prison with Charlie Manson get to be the new manager of the Rolling Stones? Like, these people are put in place for a reason, and there's that kind of theme goes along, you know, with Charles Manson, because he was able to avoid like meeting with his parole officer. He was traveling state to state. He was doing all sorts of things that if any normal person who was on parole did, they would be thrown back in jail. And somehow he was able to avoid all of this stuff multiple times. He was arrested multiple times for like Grand Theft Auto, for theft, for breaking into like a grocery store or a little convenience store or whatever. And he somehow just got off the hook for everything. Right. And that's how you kind of can start to tell that he's a protected man somehow. Mm-hmm. For some reason, he is an asset to whatever degree that is. And then they finally threw the book at him, you know, at the end of it, because they were setting him up to be this man that was going to run all of this stuff.
And if you run the prison system, if you run the foster care system, if you're in control of these different branches of society, you have your pick of the litter of any of these guys or girls that you want to be the fall guy,
yes,
or to be the patsy, or to to spin any kind of narrative that you want. And so it's like you can weave whatever story you want for the masses and pull any of these individuals out of prison, give them a deal they can't refuse, sort of thing. Like they have a choice anyway.
Right.
But you could just do whatever you want with these people, And so that's what I think about too, is I just think about a lot of these people who are on the inside in prison and stuff like that, and how literally you just don't know who's going to tap you on your shoulder to execute, any kind of storyline out there that they want, basically.
Right.
And so it seems like this whole entire thing, to a certain extent, was absolutely fabricated. And then it seems like too, even though once you put something out there, it's almost like controlling the narrative becomes a whole new problem as well.
Right.
But when you run the papers and the radio and everything else, it becomes a lot easier. But then public, opinion and stuff has its own way of taking storylines and kind of like, I don't know, running with it, sort of thing. And then, people come out of the woodwork with their version of the story and everything else. So culture creation, it's not an entire like foolproof sort of thing. There's an organic aspect to it, I think, actually.
Yes, there is.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to bring up too, because like with the hippie movement specifically, to talk about culture creation, when I've done research before, like years before, when I was like, reading Abby Hoffman and Stokely Carmichael and these more activists of the time, some of the accounts in those books talk about how, the hippie movement, before it was people wearing bell bottoms and long hair and all this stuff, it was straight up an anti-war movement because it was against Vietnam. And so in the early 60s, there were people, protesting, and there were people coming out and speaking out against, the war and the violence and the draft and all that stuff. And there was one account in one of the books that I read where it was a man talking about how it was so weird that all of a sudden people in bell bottoms started showing up to these protests. And it was normal ass people who were probably veterans or whatever. And then all of a sudden these young kids start showing up who are dressed up in the hippie outfit. And then it kind of became more of like a hippie thing. Then it was the hippies were protesting and whatever. And the same thing is the case for on the Sunset Strip. And I'm pretty sure Dave McGowan talks about this in Weird Scenes. So all of the bands are playing, Whiskey A Go-Go, The Rainbow, Pandora's Box, all these clubs up and down the Sunset Strip. And it was just pretty much people going, they're tripping, they're dancing, they're doing this stuff. And then all of a sudden, these group of people start coming to the whiskey, and they're dancing like super erratically. And it's like shit people have never seen before. And it's just like it's this one guy, his name was Vito Polakis, and he had a dance troupe. And people described how it was like all of a sudden these people were just coming and they were dancing so crazy and like wacky that like you couldn't even really understand what they were doing. Like they disrupted the scene, but then it became a scene, and then it became like this weird thing. And this Vito guy is highly attached to pedophilia and all sorts of weird stuff. And if you look into his story, and his wife and his son, Godo or something was the name of the son, who mysteriously died, like fell through a glass ceiling or some shit.
That's we saw part of that movie or documentary or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name.
No, I can't remember it either.
I know who you're talking about though.
But anyway, he's not alive anymore. But Dave McGowan goes into this. So there's stuff like that where you hear these little tidbits of this one person saying like, yeah, I remember when all of a sudden something just changed. or this one person started coming around and then everything changed. And Manson was that one person in Haight-Ashbury, because when he was released from prison, he was released into San Francisco. What are the odds of that? In like 1964 or something.
Right.
So we're talking like right when things are kind of starting to,
right,
bubble up in that area.
Related, very similar, but and I can't remember who the researcher is either, but basically the claim is that the famous footage of the Beatles, and they're performing back home, and all of these girls are going completely nuts, and they're like screaming and they're going crazy for the Beatles and everything else.
Oh yeah.
And it was this whole ordeal, and there's like the cops that are trying to barricade them back and stuff for the safety of the Beatles and everything else. The claim, and it may have either been Mark Devlin or Mike Williams, the Sage of Quay.
Oh yeah.
Mike Williams does a ton of research on the Beatles, and that's a whole interesting rabbit hole.
Yeah, he's great.
But I'm pretty sure the claim is that a lot of those girls were hired to be there.
I remember this.
That a lot of those girls were actually hired to be there. It was like a school day sort of thing. It was like during the day too, and that it was almost like the trajectory of the Beatles or something. Like that's how they got really popular. That's how they got really famous. So of course, if you have hundreds of schoolgirls and they're all completely freaking out and going nuts, kind of like the Elvis Presley sort of thing too, in a way, which it makes me wonder too, is some of that psyop-y bullshit stuff. But anyway, so the claim is that they actually hired a lot of young women to come and act completely erratic, like they couldn't contain themselves from seeing the Beatles and stuff like that. And so it's just like, that's how you start scenes. That's how you start movements. That's how you build momentum, And so it's just like, we know crisis actors are a thing now. We know that there's a whole industry of just hiring people for all sorts of different scenarios and events and stuff. If you have enough money, you could do it too. Anybody could do it. There's actual real companies that are public that you can be like, cool, I need 1,000 people to do this or that. And then sure enough, if you have enough money and you have the logistical power to do it or whatever, then you just do it. They were doing this back then too, So the fact that some troupe showed up and started dancing in a weird way, and then that became kind of the thing or whatever, that doesn't really surprise me like at all, and you still see stuff kind of like that happening to this day. Things are very, very, very different now, I would say. But but related, didn't the Sunset Strip, didn't all those clubs start up out of nowhere or something weird like that?
I don't 100% remember that detail. Dave McGowan does go into more of that stuff, though.
I think it was something like, I can't remember the history behind it either, but I think there's something sketch about even the clubs themselves and like how they all like out of nowhere, there's like this scene.
Right.
It was just like, okay, cool. Now there's just like this scene in LA and the Laurel Canyon area and stuff like that. Seemingly, it was almost like just things were imported here.
They were,
in so many different ways, but I think it includes the clubs too.
Well, I think so, and I know that some of the clubs too are like mafia run.
Right.
There's mafia connections all throughout this stuff, and that's one of the things that Tim O'Neill gets into in his book. And even I recently watched a documentary on the Rainbow Room. And the Rainbow Room is run by the mob, and it's currently run by not a famous mobster, but a mobster's son. A mobster who like does not have a nose, and he wears a fake nose. And I'm like, wonder why you don't have a nose. Who'd you piss off? What did you do to lose your nose? And you can like tell in the documentary, you can see the makeup line and stuff.
Right.
Dude, totally. But it's so clear. And the kid that runs it now, I mean, he's not a kid, he's an adult, but he talks about, oh yeah, I used to be in the club when I was a kid with Motley Crue and blah, blah. I'm like, great. Like, wonder what happened to you behind the scenes.
Right,
you know what I mean? It's just all creepy. And these people, the thing too that is always a running theme is these people who allow their children to be involved in this, they come from not savory upbringings either.
Yeah.
So
right.
the pedophilia, the alcohol, the drugs, the sex at a young age, whatever. This is like, it's systematic, but it's also ancestral. And that's one of the things that you learn when you start researching this stuff, because, they talk about the grandpa in the movie or the show The Munsters, the character Grandpa, he allowed Charles Manson to like babysit his children. You know what I mean? So it's like,
wow,
what? You're going to let Charles Manson, some random dude that's just kind of like this hippie dude that comes around the Sunset Strip is your kid's babysitter.
Right.
Just stuff like this where these people are in cahoots with each other and they're doing not good things, and
it's part of the business.
It's totally
it's part of
it.
The business that you basically kind of sacrifice your child.
It's true.
For the industry or whatever you want to say.
It's totally true. And so the documentary that we couldn't think of the name of with the Vito,
yeah,
it's called Mondo Hollywood.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Highly recommend that one. It's strange, but it's insightful in the way that when you have eyes to see, you see stuff in that documentary that's just like, whoa. And it's actually really cool because one of the reasons I like it is because they are actually going to some of these people's homes, like in Laurel Canyon, and they're there and they're doing kind of like dialogues and stuff. It's kind of cheesy, but at the same time, it's pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting insight. But that's Mondo Hollywood, and I'm pretty sure the Vito guy and somebody else were actually the ones that made it and produced it and everything else. I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube.
Right.
Just type that into YouTube, and I'm pretty sure we watched it on YouTube. That's a really good one.
Right.
Another really good one that's on YouTube that I just recently rewatched is called Revolution. And it kind of follows the story of a young girl who's living in the Haight and just very hippy dippy.
Explain. I'm sure most people here know what that is.
The Haight-Ashbury. Yeah, most people know probably.
But just explain it for
But
people.
just in case you don't know. So in San Francisco, Haight and Ashbury intersection, very famous for where, musicians were living, shops, rallies, music, all the things.
It was like the
counterculture mecca.
Yeah, it was like the hub of the counterculture.
And that's kind of where, if you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear flowers in your hair. That's where these musicians were beckoning people to go. That's the other thing, is that a lot of these bands were creating songs literally saying, come to the canyon.
Right.
Like the Mamas and the Papas have a song, it's like summertime in the canyon and everyone's coming to the canyon, whatever. Joni Mitchell has a whole album called Ladies of the Canyon, which is a beautiful album, by the way. I love Joni Mitchell. I love a lot of these artists. And that's why one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated with all this is because I have a deep love for the music of the time. And this was such a paradigm shift for me when I learned about all this stuff. Decade plus ago. It was kind of a world crusher a little bit because I had to swallow the fact that all the artists that I really loved and enjoyed, most of them were involved in this whole culture creation thing, whether they knew it or not. I think some of them knew and some of them didn't know. A lot of them,
it was just an opportunity.
Exactly. And you couldn't blame them. It's like I sometimes will place myself in that headspace and be like, well, if you were of age and a musician and talented enough to make it in the scene, would you have gone to Laurel Canyon? Probably. You know what I mean? So you almost have to have the compassion of that too. And I also can think about how exciting of a time it would have been for someone who was a musician and wanted to go and do all this stuff. So by no means am I like a hater on it. It's more of just like, I want to understand it. And my burning question is always why Charles Manson? I know it's just like, why was he the one selected? That's the kind of thing that I want to kind of get more to the bottom of. And then why was it Mama Cass? Why was she kind of like, she was like Mama Cass because they looked at her like a mother figure in the canyon. Mm-hmm. And her house was known as a party drug den house. If you needed drugs, according to all these books and all these stories, you went to that house. And she was a major drug dealer. And she had one of the larger houses in the canyon, and people knew of that. Joni Mitchell sings about her in the song Ladies of the Canyon. She talks about Mama Cass specifically, not saying Mama Cass, but if you know these stories, you can tell she's talking about a few different women, and you know that Mama Cass is one of them. And Frank Zappa, many people know, was a hard hitter in this scene. He had the house called that was known as the Log Cabin. And I think it was on Easter, our friend had a party, and a good friend of ours, shout out to Russell, him and I were talking about Laurel Canyon and all this stuff.
And he's a musician.
He's a
great musician.
He's an awesome musician. He's in a band with our great buddy Steve Cleveland. And Russell was bringing up Laurel Canyon stuff because he was kind of starting to look into it. And we had talked about it before. And he said, yeah, there's this Frank Zappa song. It's Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And it's the song called Plastic People. And in that song, he goes, there's literally a line, and I wrote it down and I re-listened to it just to make sure. He goes, there's a line where Frank Zappa just randomly says, there's this guy from the CIA and he's creeping around Laurel Canyon. And then the song just continues. And that line has nothing to do with anything else he's talking about in the song. Well, I guess it does a little bit because he's talking about plastic people. People who are plastic.
Fake people.
Fake people. He's talking about wearing makeup and wearing your hair this way and talking about how plastic people aren't fun or whatever. And he's kind of referring to the CIA agent as a plastic person because who's this guy creeping around the Laurel Canyon from the CIA? And my mind goes to, well, was it Frank Zappa?
Right.
Was he referring to himself? He's the man creeping around Laurel Canyon? Or was it an observation that only people in the know would know? Or I also think, as we were just talking about, people, in that scene probably also they had conversations amongst themselves and probably saw things changing or knew people move into the area or this or that or the other thing. And so how much of it is real, genuine stuff that he observed, or is it some sort of like cryptid, message that he's putting in?
Yeah, cryptic. Yeah.
Cryptic message, so it's like, well, we'll never know.
Right.
But I do know that his house had multiple tunnels and things. I mean, I don't know personally because I've never been there, but according to research that's been done, there is multiple tunnels that would come from his house. And when we visited the Laurel Canyon, where his house is, it's basically the first house. Like when you come up off Sunset Strip and you're right about to get into the neighborhood of the canyon, you take a left off of that main road. And his house is like right there. It's at the mouth of the canyon. So his was like the first house you saw when you got up there.
So just to lay another foundation for people who maybe don't know.
Yeah.
Laurel Canyon.
Yes.
So the gist of it, right, is that there's a place in LA off the Sunset Strip.
Yep.
Right. That a lot of influential musicians and like actors and celebrities and stuff basically descended upon in the 60s, and it became like there's a whole history to this place, right?
Yeah, because it was even before the 60s.
Right, where it was like a different generation though of people.
Yeah, entirely.
But what we're kind of talking about, right, is that there's a lot of people that moved there in the 60s, and it became this whole entire scene essentially.
Yes.
And it became like a who's who of the music scene. And apparently it was very open and people could walk to different houses and there was always parties and all this other stuff. And so you were kind of like, you were still in LA, obviously, but you had the accessibility of all the clubs and everything that was going on down there, in terms of the music industry. There was even a recording studio in Laurel Canyon.
Yeah.
So Lookout Laboratory Lab. Mm-hmm. And so they say that this place had been used to basically record film, record audio, do all sorts of different things. and that this was like a hub for lots of different projects, essentially.
Yeah.
And then now Jared Leto, the
Owns it.
actor, musician guy, he owns it now, which is kind of interesting. And then they say that snuff films were potentially made over there, and even like the atomic bomb footage was kind of fabricated from there and things like that. But it's just really interesting that this whole little neighborhood has like a ton of history to it, essentially, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like people like Doris Day, Houdini had a mansion there.
Right.
I mean, people, you can like rent out Houdini's mansion for
Right.
like weddings and stuff. The Red Hot Chili Peppers recorded Blood Sugar Sex Magic in the Houdini mansion.
Oh, wow.
You know, so you can like rent out that entire place and use it for things, events, and
Right.
what have you. So no, there's a lot of interesting history there. But the 60s, yeah, like you're saying, it was just like a flocking. And it wasn't all the artists, but it was people like Neil Young, David Crosby, you know, Graham Nash, Joni Mitchell, as I said, Mamas and the Papas were up in there, the Doors, Jackson Brown was another one. The Byrds were pretty much a fabricated, created band, just like I believe the Doors were as well. And there's a handful of other bands that I think that were created. You know, I'm just naming a few of the musicians, but there was a different scene because then there was the San Francisco music scene where you had Janis Joplin and you had the Jefferson Airplane and Jimi Hendrix, you know, different bands. It's kind of funny. Like there were different scenes. The Grateful Dead was kind of like a mixture of the two. You know, they were in San Francisco much more. A lot of the footage that you see, if you look it up online, you know, a lot of it is the Dead in Golden Gate Park, you know, doing these shows or whatever. And so it's just kind of interesting to see the different types of music and how they were split and the cities that they were in. And then Austin, Texas also had a really big counterculture hippie scene in the 60s as well that isn't as well known. But that's a rabbit hole I also went down. And then Austin, Texas is a sister city to Portland, Oregon, which we have a good buddy who we know through our friend Bud, Sam, who was actually living in Portland in the 60s in his, you know, late teens, early 20s, and confirmed that there was quite a scene also in Portland.
Oh, yeah. And he's told us about different festivals and stuff like that going on around here.
Gregory, our friend Gregory went to the Vortex Festival, which that's a whole other rabbit hole that you could talk about. Mm-hmm. Our friend Tim knows a lot about that festival. So there were a lot of little scenes too that were going on. It wasn't just LA and it wasn't just San Francisco, but the Austin scene is very interesting. And there's a band out of Austin. It's one of my favorite bands. They're called the 13th Floor Elevators. And they were one of the bigger bands / players in that scene. And that band and the leader of that band have a really interesting story as well. And there was a documentary that came out about the lead singer of that. It's called You're Gonna Miss Me. And it's actually a really sad story. And his brother kind of like ended up... the lead singer, I think his name is Robbie something. He ended up kind of like losing his mind. He like went schizophrenic, and his brother actually ended up like taking over his estate. And by the end of his life, he couldn't take care of himself, and kind of classic story. Family member kind of comes in, takes advantage, and now has the rights to a lot of like the music and everything else. So sometimes it's kind of hard to find stuff on them. But they kind of made a comeback maybe about like 8 years ago. They became really popular. They like came out of the woodwork for some reason. But anyway, these scenes were kind of connected in certain ways.
It reminds me, I have to bring this up because I think it's part of the whole narrative with everything. But in at least 2 of the books that I've been reading over the last like 6 months, one of them is by Kenneth Grant. He gets into this idea, and if I'm not mistaken, this other book that I haven't quite made it through mentions the exact same thing, where literally the belief that's put out there, the information that he's putting out there, is that the reverence for the North at some point was flipped to the West. And that that the West, the idea of the West, of going West, basically all of the symbolism attached to the North The North, I think of renewal and rebirth, kind of this fountain of youth, paradise, Eden, utopia, all of these different types of things that literally there was a conscious effort from culture creators or whoever that literally they flipped the directions and they gave people the symbolic reverence of the North via the West, via promoting the idea of going West. And so what's this whole entire scene all about? It's about going West. That's what Manifest Destiny is. It's like, go West, young man. That's what the fucking, the whole 49er gold rush thing. Go West, develop the West. There's opportunities in the West. Go westward. Go to California. Go to the Golden State.
Yep.
So to me, I think that part of that is kind of relevant to the conversation.
No, that's a great point.
And look at how much it kind of clicks and just resonates with people, and look at how many people went West because of this. Just like you're saying, I mean, how many kids literally didn't even tell their parents and fucking just like went West to go to a show or went West to just go to San Francisco or whatever.
And never came back.
And
spiraled out. And that's kind of one of the sadder parts about it too. And that's a great point because even Jim Morrison, it's a quote from a song, "The West is the best." It's like that, and like we were just talking about, these other bands telling people, come to the Canyon, come to San Francisco, do this stuff, leave your family. And a lot of these kids were super young. Like they weren't they were like 14 years old, 15, 16, I'm sure older, maybe even younger. And what ended up happening too was like the 60s had a height, just like all these times have a height. The Summer of Love was 1967. Some people think it's 69 because that's when Woodstock and everything happened, but it was actually the official Summer of Love was 67, but it was like by the time 69 rolled around, then you had the murders or whatever they were, and then you have Woodstock. And any research you do or stuff you look into, it was like all of a sudden after the hippy dippy stuff was waning, it was like PCP was on the streets.
Oh shit.
Speed was on the streets.
Right.
And then you have all of these kids living in flop ass houses and they're runaways. They have no money, no job. Not saying a job is like anything very important, but you know what I'm saying. They have no direction. They just spent, 6 years of their life burning out on acid, smoking weed, not really having much of a drive. Thinking that they're going to save the world by, spinning around in Golden Gate Park. They're all distracted. Right. They were led to this place. It was a freaking propagandized movement. And now you have them strung out on harder street drugs with nowhere to go. Right. And then there's a couple documentaries that come out just kind of like showing the aftermath on hate. Ashbury, and kind of like how it slowly just kind of became like a not very savory, good, safe. It wasn't a safe place anymore. You didn't want to be. I can't even
imagine.
I can't either. It's like I sometimes like I sometimes do. I do try and put myself in situations like this where it's like, imagine what it would be like. Where it's like, wow, you had all of these people that were peace and love and thinking everybody was best friends, and then. No, it doesn't work that way. When your stuff isn't based in anything real or true or grounded, that stuff gets uprooted real fast, and then you realize who your friends are and who they aren't. And
it's the whole thing. This
really
is
unfortunate.
What progressivism is all about. It's always about the new thing, the next thing, destroying the old thing. No traditions, no foundation, no roots to any of this stuff. So of course that's always appealing to young people.
Oh yeah.
Young people love that shit, and so music and girls and guys and drugs and whatever. San Francisco, it's very progressive, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, of course it's a lot of people are going to find that very, very, very appealing. But there's no roots there.
Right.
There's no foundation. There's no tradition. There's no actual backbone there. And in fact, the thing that made it so appealing was all propaganda anyway.
Right.
You know what I mean? So yeah, of course, I could totally see it several years later, and then all of these people are just in really, really, really bad shape.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. And it's not that like speed or PCP wasn't a thing before that or whatever, but that it was just like they just hit then, they know exactly what to do. We have COINTELPRO, we have people that infiltrate scenes, they introduce crack to the black communities, they can introduce whatever the fuck they want to whatever community they want at any time. And they were slowly doing it with all different things, but then right at the end there to just cap it all off, that's kind of what
synthesized drugs.
Yes. Moved away from the natural drugs. And
lab created, so. Which
also was LSD. You had people, basement labs and stuff and whatever. And, it's just such a crazy scene. And I just think, too, so much of this stuff wouldn't have been possible if these groups or people or what have you weren't in cahoots with people like the CIA and the FBI and the cops that could turn a blind eye to this stuff. In that documentary I was talking about called Revolution, there's a scene in there where the girl goes to the free clinic, or she goes to some clinic, or she meets someone on the street where they're literally just handing out LSD to these kids to then go hand out to other people. It was that easy. It was just, and it was so prevalent and it was so normal that it was like, hey man, I got tabs. Oh, you want some tabs? Yeah, I got like 20 of them. Okay, yeah, here, take 10 of them. And then you give some to your friends. Like, that's kind of how it worked. And it was distributed through these places like the Free Clinic, which Tim O'Neill talks about in his book, was totally run by the CIA. And Manson was all up in that shit.
So again, for people out there, the Free Clinic, would it not be dissimilar to like a Planned Parenthood sort of thing?
Very similar, yeah. Although the Free Clinic was more, you could go there and get like STD tests, you could get birth control, but you could also get like an exam, or you could you could talk to someone if you needed mental health help or whatever, whereas Planned Parenthood is more focused on the sex and freaking eugenics. That's what I was looking for. But no, the San Francisco Free Clinic, I don't think it exists anymore. I feel like I remember reading an article, it closed. And I could be wrong, so don't 100% quote me, but I'm almost 100%.
It probably is closed.
That it closed within the last like 2 or 3 years. But Tim O'Neill did a lot of really great research digging into that organization. And Manson was very heavily tied to the Free Clinic because he was basically a pimp for the girls that he was running around with. So he was a pimp in his own way, and he was running his women to topless go-go dancing bars and doing prostitution stuff. Now, Manson had a deal with the Free Clinic that he could bring his girls there whenever he wanted to, because they were all getting gonorrhea and all the stuff that was going around. So they were all getting treated there. A lot. And so were a lot of other people. And so I also wonder then too, because I wonder if there could have been something with the Free Clinic, even were there vaccines given that could have then maybe spread?
Oh, dude, experiments.
Yep,
like experimental vaccines or drugs or whatever.
STDs that were introduced through the Free Clinic. I would think so too. I mean, knowing what they do now and what everything with the cowpoke that came through, it's like, what would have stopped them from experimenting on all these people? How many of these people were sterile after they went to the clinic? Same thing with the Planned Parenthood stuff. It's very much similar to that. And there's an agenda behind it. But again, I highly recommend Chaos by Tim O'Neill, because he really did so much deep digging that no other researcher on this topic has done. And he even admits in one of his interviews that like it basically like he found himself in the middle of this. And he at one point was just like, how the fuck did I even get here? He said, this information is like a vortex. Like you start pulling one thread, and just like how many of us, even all of you guys in the chat, how many threads have you pulled? And then there's like, oh, there's this thread. Okay, now this thread's coming out. Now this thread. And he described this situation, this whole Manson thing just like that. It was like when I'd pull on one thing, all these things would fall out, and then I'd have to follow those other things because then
Which led to even more
which
stuff.
led to more things falling out. And it
Yeah.
was like, I can't remember how many years of research that he put into that book, but it was multiple.
Yeah, it's a hefty book.
Yeah, hefty book, multiple years. He was able to tried to get interviews with people like Terry Melcher, who was a really integral part of the Laurel Canyon scene. He was one of the people that got Charles Manson actually the closest to a record deal, and was able to get Manson into these recording studios. And the Beach Boys, there's a whole weave with the Beach Boys. A lot of people know.
Oh yeah, right.
And the Beach Boys actually stole one of Manson's songs. The song, I actually used it in my Instagram stories today. It's called "Cease to Exist," and that was Manson's song, and the Beach Boys actually stole it, and it's on one of their LPs.
Wow.
And that was like a big controversy thing too. And a lot of the mainstream research will say Manson carried out the murders because he was mad about the record deal not going through. That's the whole mainstream narrative, because the house that that Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski were living in was previously lived in or owned by Terry Melcher. And Terry Melcher was the man that got Manson closer to these record deals, who let him borrow Ferraris and all of these things, and got him drugs and got him women. They were all partying all very closely together, and everything kind of fell out, but that's the mainstream story, that Manson said, go back to that guy's house because I didn't get my record deal and anyone who's in there gets killed or whatever. And so that's the mainstream story. But what I really think is going on with it is that there was multiple things that went wrong, whether it be this music thing, whether it be drug deals gone wrong, people getting ripped off, people getting drugs that weren't strong. Mescaline was new on the scene, and there's a story that Manson got a bad batch of mescaline, so he was going to the Tate house because Abigail Folger, the heiress to Folger Coffee, and her husband Wojtek Warkowski,
that sounds about right.
yeah, they were major mescaline dealers in the canyon, and that's like well known. It's like documented and stuff. And so there's that. There's snuff films that were connected to all this stuff. There's pornography that was made with big wig Hollywood names. That if any of that stuff got out, that would be not a very good scene. There's also documentation that after the murders happened, one of the first people that was on the scene and allowed in the house was Jack Nicholson.
Right. Yeah, I remember that.
And it's talked about that Jack Nicholson was able to enter the house multiple times. What were you doing in there, buddy? What are you grabbing? What are you taking from the house that you don't want people to find? Same thing happened,
And Nicholson obviously did stuff with Polanski.
Exactly. And Polanski was in Europe when all of these murders happened.
All right.
And so he wasn't even in the country, supposedly.
Sharon Tate, the whole Sharon Tate thing happened when he was out of the country?
Yes.
Oh, shit.
That's the story.
Wow.
And so Jay Sebring, who, for those who don't know, was the hairdresser to the stars. He was Sharon Tate's ex-boyfriend. And Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring remained friends, even though her and Polanski were, married or engaged or whatever they were. Pretty sure they were married. And so that evening at Sharon Tate's house, it was Sharon Tate, it was Jay Sebring, it was the Abigail Folger, it was the Wojtek Warkowski guy, and I'm pretty sure that those were the people that were there. Besides, there was like a grounds boy that lived,
like
groundskeeper that lived in a home down the property, which that's still a very blurry story. And he had a friend that was visiting him supposedly when Manson's crew showed up, and his name was Stephen Parent. And he was literally driving out of the driveway when they were coming in, and they murdered him in the car. That's the story of that. And this groundskeeper boy that was staying on the property claims to have heard nothing. He didn't hear screams. He didn't hear gunshots. He didn't hear anything.
Right.
That's the story with that. So, all in all, to me, there's so much stuff that links to me that it's just a big, massive cover up for something bigger and deeper that was going on. And then one step further, there were also people on the night after the Tate murders was the LaBianca murders, and that sometimes gets a little bit overshadowed. And they say in the mainstream that they just randomly selected this house and they just went in and killed these people. Not the case. The LaBiancas were definitely tied with the mob, and I think his name was Leno LaBianca. He owned a few grocery stores, supermarkets in the area, and the Manson crew used to hang around that neighborhood, which I think was in Bel Air, and they used to party at one of the houses that was next to the LaBiancas.
Totally not that important. Bel Air is another name for Satan.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, So the Fresh Prince of Bel Air. It literally Bel Air, because sometimes he's known as the Prince of Air.
Whoa.
And so Bel Air is like 1,000% connected to some esoteric shit. So I'm not saying that that's completely related or whatever, but every time I hear Bel Air, I can't not think that.
Damn. Well, that's interesting.
Anyway, but proceed.
So the LaBiancas owned the grocery store. Now, one of the things that the Manson girls are known for is dumpster diving. One of the links with the LaBiancas...
They look like dumpster divers.
They do. One of the links with the LaBiancas is that the grocery stores that they used to go to were owned by the LaBiancas, and it's rumored from Neil Sanders' book, this is another good one, another really great read, that the girls had a deal with the managers of the store, that they slept with the managers and the managers let them go dumpster diving. And that was at the LaBianca's supermarket.
Oh.
And they were also linked up, like I said, with the mafia. So we all know, I mean, from, movies and all the other things about the mob that, there's all sorts of stuff that is goes on. Sex, drugs, weapons, trafficking, you name it. Yeah, and supermarkets make a lot of money. And so this guy had a lot of money, and that was their second set of murders that they committed. And that's where the famous pig inscription in the belly comes from. And they use the blood, of the victims and wrote pig on the wall, and then that's where they wrote helter skelter. So that's where that comes from, is from the second night of those murders, which are supposedly random, but I don't believe that they're random at all. And who knows what the Biancas knew or didn't know or whatever.
And then also, just to circle back to Polanski real quick, but Rosemary's Baby.
I know.
It seems like that's like foreshadowing some of this stuff.
Yes, it does.
And so to me, it's just one of those things too, where it's like, once you watch Rosemary's Baby and you have an understanding of some of this stuff, you just can't deny the fact that in some way, shape, or form, they're synchronistically or synchromistically completely connected somehow. It's too crazy. The parallels are just like completely stacked on top of each other. And so that's another element too that makes me think like, well, again, is this premeditated, like way premeditated?
Right.
Was this a ritual of some kind? Or did it not even happen? Was it only a ritual in the eyes of the public? It's like there's ritualistic tendencies to it, or there's like a ritualistic element, even though it didn't necessarily happen. I don't know. So I'm just saying though, that when you look at Rosemary's Baby as something that's connected to all of this stuff, it's like it's undeniable. You can't not see it once it's pointed out to you.
It's true. And I know a lot of people's arguments for debunking that one is, well, there's a book, it's based on a book or whatever. It's like, that's cool, that's fine, but Roman Polanski made the movie.
It almost adds to
right,
in a way.
So it's almost like that's valid. I get it. So I think people try and debunk it by saying like, no, that can't be possible because it was already written before Roman Polanski did it. It's like, but everyone knows that books and movies don't translate 100%, and it is quite uncanny when you look at it through the lens of Roman Polanski basically showing you exactly what
Roman Polanski
happened
in that movie is the main character, is the husband.
Yes.
And so he's trying to make it big by acting. Roman Polanski's trying to make it big by being a director, being in the industry. He's having his first child. Same thing in the film, and this child was looked at as being like, obviously it's like a demonic child. There's a working or a ritual behind it that she's unaware that she's holding a demonic baby.
Right.
And everyone around her is in cahoots with it, but she's innocent, And then it's like the similar sort of thing with I feel this way with a lot of women in Hollywood or in these industries or whatever. It's Sharon Tate in particular, man. She was gorgeous. She was talented. And it's just like, she probably didn't know all the things that the people around her were involved in.
I don't think so.
She was just a pretty face.
Right.
Right. She was talented and she was a pretty face. So, she probably has no idea probably Polanski's real history and how he parties with the boys and, all this other kind of stuff. And Polanski was an intellectual too. And so an intellectual to the point where and then look at his films that he made later on, like The Ninth Gate.
Right.
He was an intellectual to the point where I think what happens, especially in Hollywood and stuff, is a lot of these guys find occultism at some point. They find the occult, they find magic, they end up being really curious, they end up rubbing elbows with people who are interested in some of this stuff. And as we know too, it's like, people in the 40s, 50s, 60s, like the occult scene was popping off on the West Coast.
Oh yeah.
In Southern California and in the Bay Area. And so that's a whole nother side weave that we could get into, at some point. And so it's just one of these things where it's just kind of like, well, dude, fucking Roman Polanski literally used the eyes of Anton LaVey, the guy who started the Church of Satan, as the demonic eyes in Rosemary's Baby.
Right, of the devil. Who's raping Rosemary.
Exactly.
Right. And, anyone who's done any research on the 60s, the Church of Satan is when it like really came about in the 60s,
right? In
the early to mid 60s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I think it was like 64 or something like that. But yeah, no, totally. And there was a huge interest, like you're saying, in all this stuff,
right?
And it's in the artwork of the albums of the time.
Right.
It's throughout the process church, the groups that were popping up, all of this stuff. It's there. And that's why too, I don't deny or doubt that Manson was doing maybe stuff like that, hanging out with these people. I just don't think it was as big of a thing with the Manson mythos as the mainstream, story wants you to
do. To me, what it sounds like from
everything
everything you've told me, because you've read all this stuff, but it's almost kind of like, it seems like it was covering up a lot of the underbelly that has always existed and will continue to exist. But the people who are in charge, the politicians or the police chief or whoever the fuck, whatever, public personality type people, they're the ones who get the most nervous about this stuff getting out there.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Because then because they're working with the mob and everything else. So it's like the mafia has always had sex rings, pedophilia has always been a thing, drugs have always been a thing, all sorts of illegal underground activities, right? Mm-hmm. It's like common knowledge now. It's like this shit happens. It's like always happened, I think, And so I think that it was covering up a lot of that stuff. And what's the perfect way to cover it up? By creating an even more sensational story.
Yeah, totally.
Totally. And then everyone's attention, because people like drama, people like they like headlines, so people are going to pay more attention to that than probably all this other stuff. So what I found actually is that I can think of a few different examples where the story that's being covered up actually isn't even as sensational or crazy as the story that they put out there.
That makes sense.
That the actual real narrative, it's going to get real people in trouble, and actual, like I'm saying, like public personalities or whatever would fucking be devastated, or their lives would be ruined if it actually got out there. But so what they put out there is something that's even crazier than all the stuff that's actually happening. Yeah. And so then it's the perfect way to divert attention and everything else.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes total sense.
So I think that's one of the tactics out there. So maybe that's the tactic behind this whole entire thing.
Yeah, I kind of think that there's something to it for sure.
Give the people something really, really juicy and sensational.
Right.
You know, and it's covering up all this stuff that's been going on since forever anyway.
Right. Well, and then it makes me think of Hollywood Babylon. By Kenneth Anger, that book. And he goes into, how Hollywood Babylon, all of this stuff that we're talking about has been going on since the beginning of time, since the creation of Hollywood, golden age of Hollywood. There's all the same sort of things going on.
There's always been a seedy underbelly.
Yep. There's murders, there's drugs, there's sex, there's rapes, there's prostitution. All of it, it's all there. And the way that our society is, it will always be there, as you're saying. And there's always going to be people that are willing to be hooked up in it and whatever, because, one of the things I always try and keep in mind with this stuff is the types of people we're talking about who got involved with a lot of this stuff are highly wounded people. They, a lot of them, some with the Manson family, these kids that were attracted to Manson, some of them came from broken homes, but a lot of them came from upper middle class homes.
Yeah, right.
That were just bored and never felt loved because their parents were too wrapped up in making money or too involved in their life or, whatever. It's the common theme is that they're children that felt unloved. They felt disconnected from their home. They were either abused at one point. Some of the ones that were a little bit more wacky, like Susan Atkins, she's usually the poster girl that's usually up on a lot of the photos. She was one of the main girls who was involved in the murder, kind of more the wilder one. She comes from a pretty bad situation of like sexual abuse throughout her childhood and drugs at an early age. So she was a very unstable person. But like I'm saying, a lot of these people came from homes that were, well established or whatever, but there's a disconnection, but there was money, just like any cult. So these children have money and they're willing to give it to Manson. So, a couple of the girls came in at certain times where their bus broke down. Oh, well, I've got $6,000 because my dad gave it to me. And guess what? I get a $2,000 trust fund every month. Oh, well, to Manson, that was just like any cult.
Right.
That's the first thing they do. They take your identity and then they take your money. And one of the things that we've talked about, and one of the things that was so dark to me when I first started doing this research, was the way that Manson would initiate these kids, specifically the women, would be by having sex with the women, and he would quote say, "I am your father. Think of me as your father while I'm having sex with you," and that would break them. That would be the break,
right?
And then that would be the break on an emotional level, and then they would look at him as their father. So it was the psychological, emotional thing that would happen, because the mainstream story would say, oh, he put a spell on all these women and he would dance and mesmerize them. It's like, no, he just psychologically broke them and traumatized them and mind fucked them, and then continued to have sex with them, and then would, start orgies within the group. And then his rule was, you have to be okay having sex with everyone. So even if you're a man,
never had a gay experience or whatever.
Yeah, if you've never had a gay experience, well, guess what? You're going to have one right now. Right. And we're doing it. And if you don't like it, then you can leave or whatever. And that was another thing that how he broke people and how he got them to submit. Because anyone who knows about sexual trauma or the connection that we have with sex, it's one of the most sacred things that you can have, one of the most sacred connections. And when that trust is broken, or when you're pushed into something you don't want to do, or you're forced, there is a split that happens. And in that split, there's opportunities for programs to be inserted. And that's how it goes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but sodomy was a thing for him, right?
It was a thing for him.
So sodomy...
And he was sodomized throughout his childhood.
Right. So sodomy is an ancient mind control technique. It's more than that. It's a lot of things, but that is one of the roles it's played throughout history. Yeah, has been that a lot of generals and like leaders of armies and stuff like that like were proud sodomites, and that they would encourage their the soldiers to sodomize each other.
Whoa.
And they also used it as a programming tool themselves. And so basically the if you were someone who fancied that and knew how to use it, basically it gives you the ability to control people and to mind fuck people and to program people. And so it's been used as a mind control technique and tool for a very, very long time. And so to me, a lot of the things that you've told me about Manson, he learned, I think in part, maybe just through his life, he learned some of these techniques or ideas, but it's possible that some of these things were actually passed down to him so that he can create his little cults and stuff like that, potentially, because that is a, it's just one of these things where he called himself the god of fuck or king of fuck or something, right?
Yes, it was the god of fuck. Yeah.
The god of fuck, sodomizing people. Imagine me being your father.
Yeah.
And then so you could sodomize the women, you could sodomize the men, you could have control over them. And then it seemed like at some point he may have learned like tantric techniques, or he may have learned how to, hold his orgasm and stuff like that.
Right.
And so I think that he learned some of this behavior somewhere, obviously. And I would not be surprised if he learned it through like occult channels.
Yeah, no, he probably did.
Sex magic. Basically.
Yeah, sex magic for sure. Because that's kind of like the explanation too of when they're like, oh, a crazy cult leader leads these people in murderous rage or whatever. It's like, well, it wasn't necessarily, that's why the mainstream thing is so tricky. And that's why this subject is really worth diving into deeper, because when you start looking at things like this, then you can see how he was able to control them. Not only was it through sex, but it was also drugs. Mm-hmm. Because the story goes is that these they were constantly kind of like on something. They were dosed with LSD multiple times. The biographies or the autobiographies of like people like Susan Atkins or Tex Watson, Bobby Beausoleil, they talk about how it was like they were on acid like all the time, every day. For a long time. Right. And it's that's the other thing too, that you have to keep in mind as well. So not only were they broken on, were they being controlled with sex, it was their minds were being controlled with drugs, and a drug like LSD. Anyone who's taken LSD, I can't even imagine being on
it'd be awful.
For multiple days in a row. That would not be fun. It might be fun for a little while, but not when you're in a situation kind of like that, and so. And you're getting drugs from people who are manufacturing it to literally mind control people. And, they were doing all sorts of experiments outside of what Manson was doing. And as I said earlier, you could go to these places. They were like literally just handing out acid, to people. And you could buy it for like $1 and, college campuses and what have you. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. It reminds me of one of the things that Kathy O'Brien talked about. And so for people who don't know, Kathy O'Brien, she's a very, very interesting person. And she basically had acute, hardcore, if her story is to be believed, but she had acute, hardcore MK Ultra style mind control programming done to her. To the point where she was basically not even like a real person.
Yeah, she was like a sex robot.
She was like a sex slave, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but the programs that they put into her are like amazing. They're like, it like blows my mind if this is actually really true, And we got a chance to meet her and talk to her briefly at a conference that we went to many years ago.
Yeah.
And so her story is really fascinating. But her main book is called Transformation of America. And as an example, one of the things that they did to her was that she had perfect memory. And so she had perfect memory because she was groomed and programmed to have perfect memory. And so they can literally ask her to record something. You dictate it to her. You say it. She can memorize it. And then you can send her halfway around the world. And then the person on the other end who's meeting her can pull out that recording, and then she will literally verbatim, word for word. And what I remember reading was that she could even match like the accent and stuff.
Yeah, I remember that.
And she'll say exactly what you said. So then there's no physical recording anywhere. There's no paper trail anywhere of what the correspondence was, but it was all in her memory, And so she was used like a robot in so many different ways. But one of the things that she mentioned was that she was basically she was constantly drugged because she was a sex slave. And so if she was going to service someone or a group of people, they would want her to be drinking or taking this or taking that or whatever. They actually, I don't know if I'm sure you remember this part, but she said the only drug she was not allowed to take was cannabis.
I definitely remember that.
Yeah, because and my theory about that is that it actually breaks down the walls. It actually like breaks down partitions that are put up there. And so she basically had she would be fucked up all the time because they would constantly be giving her these drugs and whatever. And then she was also constantly starved as well.
Oh, that's right.
And so she was never given like a complete full like stomach. She was never given healthy meals. She was never a lot of things. She was completely deprived of like real food basically. And of a normal routine that way. And so one of the things though that she said was that between the drugs and the sleep deprivation and then the food deprivation, she said she never knew if she was coming or going anywhere.
I remember that.
And so to me, it's just one of these things where I think this seems to be kind of like a common thread. If you're going to have like a slave or something like that, it's just like you always want them to be so deprived and so out of it that they don't even know what's going on.
And you're like in survival mode. Your body kind of goes into like a sort of like a survival mode thing to even just stay afloat.
Right.
And I'm really glad you're bringing this up because it really kind of brings clarity to what we're talking about with the Manson thing and how something like this could even be kind of carried out, really.
Right.
Because there's other stories too and Kathy O'Brien talks about this too. I mean, these people are abused. Like Manson would beat them and like slap the girls across the face and fucking call them whores and bitches and all the things that would go along with this type of lifestyle was happening to these young, impressionable women and men, you know? And so it's like, not only then are you in this situation where you're totally away from your family, your friends, you're now amongst this group of people who are your family, quote unquote, the family, this leader guy that tells you what to do. You're going out, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're going to topless bars, you're running drugs, you're taking trips up and down the West Coast in a bus to do whatever, transport weapons and cars and all this stuff, and so it was basically just a huge sex, drugs, and weapons and transportation device.
Most of the underground mafia stuff has to do with trafficking. You're either trafficking people, you're trafficking
goods.
And like what am I looking for? Arms.
Yeah.
Or you're trafficking illegal whatever the hell.
Yep.
Or even just normal shit, to be honest, actually. And so you're trafficking, just that's the deal, is you're actually just transporting things from here to there to here to there, which is why the ports and stuff like that and transportation via trains and boats and planes and stuff like that's why the mafia is always there,
Right.
So if there's transportation to be done, the mafia is there.
Right.
That's just how it works.
Yeah. Right.
Because that's their business. That's the whole entire thing that they do. And then certain things are illegal in this country, or you can, whatever. There's just like all of the rules and regulations of what can be transported where and what can be taxed and all that kind of stuff. It's just like, that's how they roll. That's how they make their money. So I remember you telling me some of this stuff with little Charlie Manson here, and it seems like, well, he's just doing mafia stuff.
Yeah, he is. And he was linked up also with, this isn't like a secret to most people who've done the research, but the Hells Angels, and then the other biker group that was famous at the time was Satan's Slaves. And they were definitely in cahoots with the CIA and the mob because the biker gangs were trafficking the drugs, and they
Right.
were the ones that were trafficking harder drugs as well, and women, and all that. But when it came to the drugs, the biker gangs were very much involved with with that trafficking. And so again, you're also dealing with transportation. They're a biker gang. They all have
Right.
motorcycles that can drive wherever you want, and you can go in places where cars can't go, and you can do all sorts of shit. And you're protected because the mob and the CIA and the cops are all in cahoots with them.
Right.
And so and at the end of the day, when you look back at it, it's all a brilliant system for these things to happen. But the thing is, it's like so hidden in plain sight. And I think nowadays more people are maybe becoming aware that this is how like the world works. But at the same time, I'm not holding my breath for people to start like understanding it or anything. But yeah, I don't know. It's such an odd thing. It's interesting to see how when you talk about Charles Manson and you see the mainstream story, but then when you actually really get into it, how different it really is. And so that's why I would encourage people to, as I said, Tim O'Neill's book Chaos, which I don't have because when I read it, a good friend of mine lent it to me. So I actually am going to purchase it again because now that I'm jumping back into this rabbit hole, I want to reread that one because there's so many nuggets in there. This here is Now is the Only Thing That's Real. This is by Neil Sanders. A lot of people know Neil Sanders from his back in the day, he was doing a lot of research on like more of like media propaganda and stuff. But he came out with this book. Gosh, oh man, I don't know what year it was. 2017. This is a huge book, but I really enjoyed it. He was the one that kind of cracked codes for me that no other researcher had cracked at that point in 2017, because he kind of debunks a lot of the mainstream stories that we were talking about, and also like the satanic panic kind of stuff, debunking that as in so much so that like, yeah, Manson may have been connected with some of these people, but it's not as big of a deal as the mainstream media makes it. Most people know Dave McGowan, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. This is a wonderful read if you're into this information. So he touches on Manson for sure in this book, but he's going more through like individual bands, individual artists, movie stars who all lived in the canyon at some point. More details on specific stories. He talks about the Vito Polakis guy that I was talking about earlier.
And he died after this book was put out there.
He did. He mysteriously kind of got cancer really quickly. He went to the hospital within like a week. He was dead. So I think he definitely hit nerves with this book. And one of the things I was hoping we still had it, but I think in our move we must have gotten rid of it. The way that we were actually introduced to Dave McGowan was through our friend Bud. And Bud is the man who we've talked about so many times, but who was working in the music industry in the 60s, so all up in this stuff. He got haircuts from Jay Sebring and stuff, but he and his friend Marshall had done research on Dave McGowan, because Dave McGowan, before he put out this book years ago, he had a blog on the internet, like when the internet was still kind of like fresh and new in the 90s, and he had a whole series on his website that basically was the information he was learning about Laurel Canyon, about this book. And it was all on internet form, and Bud had it in a binder and he had given it to us.
Yeah, and I think one of his things was that he was a contractor in LA, and so he was always zipping around LA.
Oh.
And so I remember him talking about that. And so because he was a contractor, he would have a job here and then a job there and a job there. And so for years, he just got intimately familiar with LA, and so that kind of helped him with his research, because while he was here, he would check out the house where so-and-so lived at, or then he would whatever. And so I think that was kind of part of the deal. He was a great researcher, just in his own right. But I think that there's kind of a weave there for him that way.
Yeah, definitely.
So he knows all the spots.
Yeah.
I think he grew up there too, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I do remember specifically in that binder, I mean, he had photos and everything.
Yeah, he was way into it.
There's actually something very interesting. He talks about it in the book. But there is in LA in the canyon, I'm pretty sure it still exists. Like there is huge areas of like cement, like almost like it was like an old area where people lived at some point. And there's there's an area in the canyon where there's a huge long stairway that goes down the side of a hill. And if I'm not mistaken, it's closer to the Hollywood sign, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, he had photos of all of this stuff, and he was like down there, and you can tell there's like structures there. Like it was a structure where there could have been a building or something. And he poses the question of like, why the hell is this literally on the side of this hill? Like hundreds of steps down into this canyon. What is this?
What was it?
What was it? You know, no one knows about it.
What are they covering up?
What are they covering up? It's all hidden. You wouldn't, if you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't know. And anyway, he talks about that area in this book. But that was one of the things that I remember that stood out to me from the binder information, because I remember him having those photos and being like, yeah, that's really strange. Like, what would that even have been?
Right.
So yeah, I think let's see. Let me just see. I mean, we titled this episode Turn In, Tune In, Drop Out.
Turn on, tune in, drop out, which was famously quoted by Timothy Leary. Right.
And that was like the mantra of that time.
Right.
You know, because they were they wanted people to get turned on and have free love and free sex, and to tune in to their program and to drop out of, you know, society, school, life, whatever, and come to, you know, the hippiedom.
We'll unpack this more, obviously.
We will, yeah.
But I think one of the things I picked up now, because you came up with the title today. Mm-hmm. I let you come up with the title. Just kidding. But turn on, tune in, drop out. I can't not think of technology. Turn on, like turning on a device. Like turning on the radio or turning on the television or turning on your computer or something like that.
Maybe that was the subliminal.
And then tune in, again, reminds me of technology. It reminds me of tuning into a frequency, a vibration, you know, sort of thing. And so, again, acid is like a lab created drug, right? Mm-hmm. And so that requires technology, that requires science and all this other stuff. And so one of the things I wanted to mention was that I think you could look at this whole entire scene, the whole entire narrative, especially of the 60s, maybe not so much Charles Manson or whatever, maybe, but there's always a tech sort of component with it. And San Francisco has notoriously been a tech hub for a very, very long time. It still is. And look at what it's become now, too.
Yeah.
You know? And so the Bay Area has long been the hub, the home for all of these huge technological corporations. It's even the fucking headquarters or the, what's it called? The capital city of Star Trek.
Really?
Yeah. San Francisco is like the capital of Star Trek. It's it's like Washington, D.C., but in the Star Trek universe. And so, anyway, San Francisco has a very, very seedy history with technology and with occultism as well, and black magic and all this other stuff. This is where Michael Aquino is based out of, with the Temple of Set and the Presidio military base, if people are familiar with any of that kind of stuff or whatever. But there's like a whole long laundry list of all of the technological happenings and breakthroughs and whatever that have come out of the Bay Area. That's like one of the things that it's been known for, is always pushing things forward,
right?
Always being progressive, hyper progressive. So much so even that literally a lot of the laws that get disseminated throughout the country come from California, and a lot of those laws that get seeded out throughout California come from places like the Bay Area and come from places like LA. So like the most draconian laws come out of places like the Bay Area. And so anyway, so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as well, that I'm, as you're kind of talking about some of the stuff today, I'm just kind of seeing like the technological component with everything, and how the transhumanist agenda is very much baked into a lot of this stuff as well. You know, it even reminds me of too, like the Grateful Dead and their whole wall of sound thing.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know, but the Grateful Dead was known for traveling around with literally the biggest, most sophisticated mobile traveling speaker setup that had existed until then.
Right.
And it required like new types of engineering for this shit. Like how do you set this up and break it down and get all the power to all the speakers and stuff. Like
very advanced for the time.
Super, super advanced. It was called a wall of sound, you know? And so it's like really advanced. And I'm like, but it's like hippies. So when, as someone who grew up, obviously we grew up at the same time, but when I thought about hippies back in the day, I always assumed that there was more of like a traditional thing, and it's like back to earth, and it's like all this stuff. It's like that's not really the case.
No.
You know, that's the other thing that I think got busted with your research here, was that your idea of the hippie very much changed from when I first met you, and what you thought a hippie represented or whatever.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, wait, so you're going to a Dead concert, you're taking a synthetic drug, and then you're in front of this wall of sound, you know, which again, at the time was very, very sophisticated. It kind of reminds me of like raves a little bit.
Yeah, it kind of is.
It's like you go to a rave and it's like super high tech, and you got all of these lights, and it's just like this whole big old production. And then now no one's even playing any music anymore. It's literally a guy who presses a button and he's pretending to do shit, you know, most of the time.
Right.
And so anyway, so I just feel like there is an angle to explore with this whole entire thing with technology. And then what did we have by the end of the decade? The moon landing.
Right.
The supposed moon landing. You know, of, all the American people, we rallied together and we made this happen. We made the impossible happen. It's the whole space race idea. And so there's a thread related to technology, and there's a thread also related to the age of Aquarius that corresponds with technology as well. And so I would say that if you're going to pick two signs out of the zodiac that very strongly relates to technology, I personally, I would say it's the polarity of Aquarius and Leo. And that you're dealing with high technology, and that Aquarius being an air sign, Aquarius also having a lot to do with electricity, and then Leo being a fire sign, the serpent. I think of these things. I think of chords.
Right.
You know, and I think of networking, and I think of all these different types of things. So I'm not going to get super into it, but Aquarius and Leo, there is a strong technological component between those two signs, I would say. And I think that could be, I don't know, just an avenue worth talking about at some point. Technology and technology's role in all of this stuff.
Dude, these are great points.
And also, after every single one of these major campaigns, just like you already mentioned with COVID, technology adoption is that much greater.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, totally. And it's easier. People sink into it just that much easier.
And also, the 60s was the first decade where like television adoption, the screen in the home, really, 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 really took off.
Yeah.
So the late 40s through the 50s is when television became more and more of a thing, you know? But then by the 60s, that's why people were protesting the Vietnam War.
Because they could see it on TV.
Because they actually could see it on television.
Right.
You know? So it's just like, so there, and then also too, it's like, where are all these hippies getting this idea from to go to San Francisco?
Right.
You know?
It's on the news.
Probably on the news, probably through the radio, and probably on television and stuff. So it's almost kind of like, I just feel like we can't discount the role technology played in all of the stuff that we're talking about.
No, I love this. I'm so glad. And you would bring this up, and it's a great point, because thinking about that that statement, turn in, tune in, drop out, in that context really actually connects a lot of dots. And totally. With, like we talked about in the beginning, the tech hippies. They were literally creating what now is the internet, these servers. They were developing this stuff in the 1960s behind the scenes. They didn't want people knowing that was going on, just like they do now. What are they creating now behind the scenes that will be given in, the next 10 years?
Right.
Right.
Oh,
Who the hell knows, that they've been creating for the last 20,
Right.
and then they sell it to us like it's new. I mean, that most people know that's how it works like that. But
Right.
very interesting. Wow. I like thinking about the technology level with this in a different way. Because, too, people like Timothy Leary and the people that were really in cahoots, they probably had inside tracked information about it, or they didn't. Or he was told that this is the phrase and whatever and this and that, and go with it or whatever, and very interesting. I love this. I love talking about this. I'm so glad we did this tonight.
Yeah, same here, baby.
And I'm so glad the ball is rolling for this kind of just to be revisited on my end, and to see what can be created with it, because it's so interesting and there's so much to dig into.
Totally. As you're talking about everything too, I'm realizing, I'm like, whoa. It's almost like a tall order to kind of encapsulate all this stuff too.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, like I said in the beginning, I think the most important thing will be to just be picking out like the very, very key things. And now you're making me want to revisit the tech hippie thing as well, because that's such a crucial part. And somehow find that documentary that we saw. I mean, we watched that probably like 4 years ago now.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll try and find that, because that would be worth rewatching and sharing it too.
Totally.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, you want to start winding down here?
I think so. Yeah. As I'm pretty sure I got through the things that I wrote down, but we went deeper, which was cool. I knew that would happen too.
Good work, babe.
Oh, thanks.
Let's say hi to the good people here.
Yeah.
We got 42 people.
Woo! Thanks for hanging out, guys.
Yeah, thanks for chilling. Man, there's a lot of comments actually. So let's see.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be.
I don't know if we'll be able to get through everything. Yeah.
The whole thing, but
Totally. Maybe do you just want to cruise through some of this stuff and see if there's anything that sticks?
sure.
I think that's around when we started, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's see. All right. So what's up, Ben?
Hey, Benjamin. Nice to see you, dude.
If you're still here, thanks for hanging out. Thanks to everybody who's been hanging out. See a lot of the same people from earlier. Let's see. Tom Waits, Going Out West. Great tune. Yeah. So Tom Waits was in on it too. Let's see. Third Eye Edify, and West is North, Masonically speaking.
Yeah, I saw that earlier. That's interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I also, what's up, my cherie?
Hello.
You know, I know I've talked about this before, but I went west. I'm from the Midwest, and I definitely had, you know, that yearning,
that itch.
the yearning, the itch, all that, you know. So it is a real thing, for sure.
Maybe too, we could just say hi to the new people.
Yeah.
Instead of reading everything.
Because I think it'll take too much time to go through. What's up, MS? Nice to see you here too.
Indeed.
Let's see, Robert Page, he was here from the beginning. Super cool to have all you guys hang out for the whole show, because this is a really fun one to do. What's up, Binna?
Hey there, Binna.
We have Lee Thunder Chicken was in the house,
What's
too.
up, Thunder Chicken?
What's up, Lee? And
Asterix, hello.
what's up? Thanks for joining us. All right. I think Annie's here. What's up, Annie? Thanks for hanging out.
Hello, Annie.
And Jason Lewis is
What's
here.
up, Jason?
Yep, showed up at the end, but that's okay.
Cool.
Awesome.
Nice. Right on.
All right. Well, we were gonna do.
We have a few shout outs.
Yeah.
A few things to go over.
Yeah, if you guys want to hang around for that.
Yeah, totally. So, just want to give a shout out to Family Fungi.
Woo!
FamilyFungi.net. And this is from those guys. So this is their remedy tincture. I've been taking it over the last few days. I believe it is helping. It tastes delicious, too.
It is delicious, guys. Bravo.
Right. And so there's reishi, lion's mane, chaga, shiitake, turkey tail, and organic raw honey in here. And I've been working with James on some design stuff, and I've gotten to know him a little bit better. And man, I just have to say, I'm like super impressed with those guys. You know, James as a person, his intellect, how thoughtful he is. I've also communicated with Elise a couple of times recently, and sounds as though we'll be collaborating as well. And I'm just like stoked to know high quality people.
Yeah, it's very nice.
You know, and so to me, and I know you've interviewed both Elise and James.
Yep.
On your page here on YouTube.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just one of these things where it's just it warms my heart when I think of those guys and kind of what they're doing. And then now having had some of their medicine and everything else, just felt like it was worth bringing that up.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Elise and I have our own chats, conversations back and forth, and getting to know her has been really nice because she's brought so many great things to my attention. Just, you know, her and I end up talking just a lot about the dynamics between women and dark feminine, divine masculine, why it's important, and, you know, how these things all kind of like intertwine in our lives and affect us in different ways. And so her and I have had some really brilliant conversations. And it's just really nice that now Mario's been working with them. They also sent us some mushrooms as well, which are really nice. And, you know, I think that it's a couple different types of reishi. If they're still hanging out, maybe they can tell us. I definitely, I think that is a reishi.
Oh, they're still here. They're hanging.
Awesome. And so I'm pretty sure these are just different types. But yeah, I'm super stoked about this.
They're beautiful.
They are beautiful. They smell amazing. I can't wait to work with them. And yeah, so thank you guys. Very much appreciated.
We feel the love.
Yeah, and it came at a really great time because,
oh my gosh, it was like
it was perfect timing. Mario was not feeling well, and then, you know, we were both still, I mean, I still feel like I am grieving Carl's loss. But,
oh yeah, it's going to take a minute.
You know, so just having a remedy like that to just give your immune system a boost and help you through challenging times is always very nice. And yeah, so we appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
And I put their website in the chat.
Oh, good. I'm just going to see if we can unblur that.
Totally.
Okay.
Something else I wanted to announce too is that I just did an interview. Well, actually, before that, all of your stuff now, all of your Healing Home episodes are all on Spotify now.
Yeah.
So we finally got the back catalog uploaded, but it's also where at?
On Apple, iTunes,
like podcasts,
and then iHeartRadio. Those are the three platforms for podcasts that you can listen to now. That was a really big one. Yeah, we been talking about putting the back catalog up so people can just listen to the episodes. So that felt really good to get that going.
Totally. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I bring that up is because I just did my first podcast episode.
Yes.
You know, with this guy named GB Marion, and I've been following his work for probably around a year or so, but he's actually a practicing what's referred to as being a Setian. And so Set, the Egyptian Set, who is kind of like in their line of mythology, he's like a great son, I would say. From the Great Mother, from Nut, or Typhon is another way of putting it. And so anyway, so I find this whole line of mythology very, very interesting. It has a lot to do with the northern sky. It has a lot to do with Ursa Major. And you know me, it's just like if people have a reverence for this stuff, I want to know what they know about it.
Oh, yeah.
I want to know what they're talking about with it. I want to know how they understand it and everything else. And so that's his jam. And so we talked about it over the weekend. And that's going to be my first official podcast episode, audio only, so no video or anything like that. But I want to start putting out just audio-based content like that. So people that I'm really interested in getting to know, or I want to know their story or whatever, I'm just going to start interviewing people. I've tried to do that, and I think I had a couple of false starts. But I feel like I'm kind of committed to at least putting out maybe a show once every couple of weeks.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Something like that. So I'm talking to him, or I talked to him. His stuff will be out probably this weekend. And then the next thing that I'm really excited about, actually, I can't wait to get this going. But I'm going to be talking to Old World Florida on the 26th, I believe.
Next Monday.
Yeah. So not this coming Monday, but the following Monday.
Yep.
And I think I just have kind of a platform to talk about whatever I might want to get into symbolically, And so just a little teaser, but I'm going to be talking about the fleur de lis. And so we've talked about that in private before. He's really interested in that symbol. I think I have a different take potentially than what his understanding is of the symbol. And so I want to talk about that with him and see what he has to say. So I'm putting together a presentation.
Woohoo! I'm so excited for you.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that one for a few reasons. So I'm putting together the presentation. It should be fun. It should be interesting. I'm pretty sure it's going to be live too. So, people can check that out once it's going. And so that's what's up with that. And then I said it earlier, but I was on the Oversharing show. It just premiered earlier today. And so you guys can check out the Brandon Bonanza channel.
Yep.
And check out that episode. And you've been on with those guys too.
Yeah, a few weeks ago. I think it premiered while I was back home in Milwaukee.
Right.
Nice conversation.
Yeah,
sure.
nice, totally chill people, casual conversation, but interesting and all that kind of stuff. So I had a good time.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, so those are kind of the things right now on my docket that are either just happened or are coming up.
Yeah, lots of things going on. And then I was just on Moonday Tarot with Kaylee Burkana just this Monday. We didn't get to go through all the signs. I think we ended at Virgo because she was having some internet problems. So it was really spotty, and it was just getting to the point where she wasn't even able to get out like sentences. So I actually think she finished the signs today. I think she was going to do that. So go to the Kaylee Burkana YouTube channel and you can find that there if you want to check that out.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Right on.
Yeah.
Very cool. And last but not least here, guys, we would like to say thank you to our patrons.
Yes, as always. Thank you, everybody. I am just so grateful for the support. It seriously is such a big help for us, and we just are very grateful for it. So thank you, Chance, Binaboo, Inland Sea, Liam, Amy, Miri and Hank, Jenny G, Erica, Moonlander, Mary, Catherine, Logan, Lily Vine, and Debbie. Thank you all so very much.
Yes, much love. And if you guys want to support the channel, you can do so. There's several different ways you can do so, but Patreon is one good way.
Yep.
Patreon.com/thehealinghome. Next week, you've got a good one coming up.
I am so excited. Maxine Miller. Oh my goodness. I'm so grateful that she wants to sit down with me and have a chat. So Maxine Miller is one of my favorite artists, illustrators, I would say. She is she's a treasure, really. Mario and I have gotten a chance to talk to her a couple times at the Tarot Symposium that comes through every year in Portland. She has such a interesting style. She works with plants. She illustrates plants, but in a very magical way. And she works with poison plants. So she has drawings for mandrake and poppy and Amanita muscaria.
She's a very prolific artist.
Very prolific.
She's done a lot of prints.
She's been at it for a long time, decades. So she's very well seasoned. She just came out with her own magical botanical Oracle, and it is herbs from the witch's garden. So she really does lean into the poison plants, which is one of my favorite things. And yeah, so we're going to talk with her on this coming Tuesday, the 20th, right before the solstice, which I also think is very timely, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So you guys can come to the Healing Home and check that out. Full Moon Offering newsletter. The next issue comes out on July 3rd. And that will be, in just a couple weeks. Holy crap, these moons come so quickly. So yeah, I also still have just a few more of my offerings from this last moon available. So I've got mugwort earth hag soap, which I'm super in love with, calendula nettle and pine shampoo. Also in love with that one, and the calendula salt soap, another one that's near and dear to me. I've got a few left of each, so if you're interested in trying any of those, you can get a hold of me. Up here is my menu with the pricing on all the things that I have available right now. And as always, you can ask me about bulk orders. Maybe you want to get a whole batch of soap. That's something you could do, and we can figure out a fair price for that or whatever. Maybe you want to get a large jar of one type of salve that I make. We can do something like that. So you can just email me at michelleshealinghome@gmail.com for any order inquiries, questions. You want to learn about my consultations, you want to read my blog, head to michelleshealinghome.com. You can find all that information there. You can also call or text me 503-568-1569.
And that'll do it.
And with that concludes this episode of Last Thursday.
I had fun.
I did too.
Good stuff.
Yes.
Looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for hanging.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right. Love you all. Take care.
Have a great evening.
Until next time.
Bye-bye.